There is a strange moment in the life of almost every collectible when nobody wants it. It sits in a drawer, it occupies a shelf, it gets pushed into an attic box or forgotten at the back of a cupboard. People stop making room for it, stop using it, and eventually start wondering why they are keeping it at all. That is usually when the interesting part begins, because collecting is rarely about finding something that looks expensive today. It is about recognizing what may become difficult to replace tomorrow. The objects in this list are particularly interesting because most of them were never designed to become collectibles. They were made to be used. Some were played with, some were worn. Some were carried in pockets, stored in garages, or left in bedrooms after their owners moved on. And that creates the possibility that future collectors may care deeply about objects that their original owners barely noticed. There is an important warning, though. Owning an old object does not automatically make you wealthy. Most examples of almost everything on this list will remain ordinary. Condition, rarity, completeness, edition, authenticity, and provenance can completely change the picture. So this is not a promise that your cupboard contains a fortune. It is a guide to the kinds of objects worth looking at twice before you throw them away. And as we move through the list, the objects become increasingly interesting. Not necessarily because every one is worth more money, but because each one reveals something about how collecting actually works. By the end, we reach an object that millions of people once considered completely ordinary. Yet a sealed example has already demonstrated just how dramatically the market can change. Let's begin with number 15. Number 15, patterned Pyrex. There is a good chance that somewhere in a kitchen cupboard, storage box, or family kitchen is a piece of old Pyrex. Perhaps it is a casserole dish. Perhaps it is a mixing bowl with a colourful geometric pattern. Maybe it has been sitting there for decades because nobody has bothered to replace it. And that last detail is part of the story. Plain, common pieces are generally not the ones collectors are chasing. The interesting examples are particular patterns, colours, promotional designs, and unusual pieces from earlier production periods. Some sought-after American patterned examples have already moved well beyond the price of ordinary second-hand kitchenware, with desirable pieces reaching the hundreds and especially scarce examples going considerably higher. The important lesson is that the material itself is not the whole story. A glass bowl is just a glass bowl until the pattern, production history, or rarity gives it another identity. That is why a quick look through the cupboard can be worthwhile. Photograph the design, identify the pattern, and compare the exact piece rather than assuming every old example belongs to the same category. And be careful with condition. Decorative surfaces can be damaged by careless cleaning, and once a distinctive pattern has been worn away, part of what made the object collectible has disappeared. There is something rather satisfying about that. An item originally created for an ordinary household task can gradually become a record of the design tastes of an entire generation. But kitchenware is only the beginning. The next category comes from somewhere much less delicate. Number 14, old cast-iron cookware. At the bottom of a cupboard or inside an old kitchen cabinet, you may find a heavy black pan that nobody wants to lift. It might even be the pan that has been passed through a family for years. To someone who does not collect cookware, it can look almost worthless. Collectors see something else. Older cast-iron cookware from respected manufacturers can attract serious interest, particularly when the maker, size, design, and condition are right. Names such as Griswold and Wagner are especially significant in the American market, while unusual sizes and scarce pieces can move into much higher price ranges. The fascinating thing about these pans is that their usefulness is part of their appeal. Unlike many collectibles, they were never really supposed to sit untouched in a cabinet. They were made to cook with. That means surviving examples carry evidence of ordinary life. The smooth cooking surface, the markings on the underside, the manufacturer's name, and even the particular shape can help identify what you have. So, if an old pan is sitting in your home, turn it over. Read the markings. Look for the manufacturer and any model or size information. And don't assume rust automatically means the object has been ruined. Cast iron can often be restored, although aggressive cleaning or alteration can also remove information collectors' value. The larger point is easy to miss. Modern manufacturing can produce excellent cookware, but older examples from particular makers represent a period of manufacturing history that cannot simply be recreated. And when a category becomes fashionable among cooks as well as collectors, the supply of genuine old examples does not increase. That leads us naturally into another category where craftsmanship matters even more. Number 13, vintage hand tools. The garage is one of the most dangerous places in the house for anyone who enjoys decluttering. Because inside old toolboxes are objects that can look completely ordinary while carrying the kind of manufacturing history collectors appreciate. Planes, chisels, braces, saws, and other traditional hand tools can attract buyers when they come from respected makers and survive in desirable forms. Certain Stanley planes, for example, can be collectible, while specialized makers and older Sheffield tools can command much stronger interest. The difference between an ordinary old tool and an interesting one often comes down to details. Look for maker's marks, look for model numbers. Pay attention to the materials used in the handles and fittings. Rosewood, brass, and carefully made wooden components can all help identify an older, better quality tool. Complete boxed sets can be particularly interesting because completeness is one of the great forces in collecting. Think about what happened to these tools over the decades. They were used in workshops. They were dropped, repaired, modified, worn down, and eventually replaced by newer equipment. Every time one disappeared into a rubbish bin, the number of surviving examples became smaller. Meanwhile, woodworking itself has become a popular hobby, creating a new generation of people who appreciate traditional tools for both their function and their history. That creates a fascinating combination. The same object can be desirable because it is useful, because it is well made, and because it represents a manufacturing tradition that has largely disappeared. And the next category demonstrates an even more powerful force: nostalgia. Number 12, modern vinyl records. Vinyl has already experienced one revival, and that makes the next stage particularly interesting. For years, many people assumed records belonged to the past. Then a new generation began buying them again. That change matters because collectors are not only interested in records from the distant past anymore. Modern limited editions, colored pressings, numbered releases, and small production runs can become desirable when the artist later becomes culturally important. The key is selectivity. Owning hundreds of ordinary records does not necessarily mean owning hundreds of valuable records. A limited pressing is different from a standard release. A numbered edition is different from an ordinary mass-produced copy. A sealed example is different from one that has spent 20 years sitting beside a turntable, and condition matters enormously. Keep records upright rather than stacked flat for long periods. Protect them from direct sunlight, heat, and moisture. If something is still sealed, opening it simply because you want to inspect it can destroy one of the characteristics that may matter most later. There is also a generational reason this category deserves attention. The teenagers buying records today are building memories around music that future adults will remember as the soundtrack of their youth. Decades from now, those people may not be looking for the newest music. They may be looking for the physical object that reminds them of who they were. That is one of the most reliable forces in collecting, and it becomes even more obvious when we move to a format many people thought had disappeared completely. Number 11. CDs and cassettes. There was a time when people couldn't get rid of CDs and cassettes quickly enough. Boxes were donated, collections were cleared from bedrooms, entire shelves of music disappeared during household moves. And that is precisely why the surviving unusual examples can become interesting. Most CDs and cassettes are unlikely to become valuable, but early pressings, unusual editions, regional releases, limited versions, sealed copies, and releases connected to important artists can have a different future. Cassettes are particularly intriguing because their cultural reputation changed so dramatically. Once considered an obsolete format, they have developed a renewed following among collectors and younger listeners. The lesson here is not to keep every disc or tape you encounter. It is to slow down before selling a large collection as one anonymous box. Separate the ordinary from the unusual. Check catalogue numbers. Look for early editions. Look for limited releases. Look for sealed items. And preserve the original packaging whenever possible. Formats have a habit of returning. The industry may move forward, but nostalgia does not move in a straight line. What seems technologically primitive to one generation can become culturally fascinating to another. And that brings us to an object whose comeback has been even more dramatic. Number 10. Film cameras. There is something wonderfully ironic about a digital generation becoming fascinated with film. For years, film cameras were pushed aside by digital technology. Compact cameras that once traveled on every holiday ended up in drawers, cupboards, and boxes. Then, younger photographers began rediscovering film. Certain compact cameras, SLRs and lenses, have consequently become much more desirable, particularly models known for their quality, design, or reputation among photographers. Some premium compact cameras that could once have been purchased for relatively modest sums have moved into the hundreds or even beyond £1,000 in the second-hand market. But the camera itself is not always the most interesting thing. Check the lenses, check the original accessories, check the cases. Check whether the battery compartment is clean and whether the shutter still functions. A camera with its original accessories can tell a much more complete story than the same body alone. And this is where modern collecting becomes particularly fascinating. The object isn't necessarily valuable because it is old. It is valuable because someone, somewhere, has decided that the experience associated with it is worth preserving. Film photography is not simply a technology now. For many people, it represents a slower way of making photographs. That emotional connection can keep a market alive for a very long time. And if you think cameras are surprising, wait until you see what can happen to clothing. Number 9. Vintage denim and workwear. Old jeans can look like old jeans. That is exactly why this category is so easy to overlook. Vintage denim collectors pay attention to details that most people would never notice. Labels, stitching, buttons, fabric construction, production characteristics, and the age of the garment. Certain early Levi's examples and other historically significant denim pieces can become extremely desirable. The condition question is also unusual here. With many collectibles, pristine condition is the goal. With vintage clothing, wear can sometimes be part of the story. Fading, repairs, and signs of genuine use may help establish that a garment actually lived the life it claims to have lived. That does not mean every dirty pair of jeans is valuable, far from it. Authenticity still matters, and ordinary modern clothing should not be confused with historically significant examples. But the most remarkable sales show how far the category can travel. A pair of Levi's dating back to the 19th century and preserved in unusual circumstances has sold at auction for tens of thousands of dollars. That is a useful reminder that clothing can become historical evidence. A work jacket can tell us what people wore. A pair of jeans can reveal manufacturing methods. A faded garment can preserve the physical traces of an earlier era. And that leads perfectly into another kind of clothing, where the event printed on the fabric can be just as important as the garment itself. Number 8. Vintage band and concert t-shirts. There is a particular kind of shirt that parents often want to throw away. The fabric is thin, the print is cracked, the color has faded, there may be holes. And yet collectors can see exactly why those imperfections matter. Original concert and band shirts from important tours can become highly desirable, especially when the shirt is connected to a significant artist, tour, or period in music history. The graphics matter, the tour dates matter, the label matters, the construction matters, and the fact that the shirt was actually worn can help establish its authenticity. Some vintage concert shirts have sold for hundreds or thousands, while exceptionally desirable examples have reached far higher prices. Again, however, not every old music shirt is a treasure. The name on the front is only one piece of the puzzle. A modern reproduction of a famous design is not suddenly valuable because the original was. Collectors want the real object, and they want evidence that it belongs to the period being claimed. So if an old concert shirt has been sitting at the back of a wardrobe for decades, photograph the front, back, and label before doing anything with it. Do not automatically wash away every sign of age. Sometimes the wear is part of the history. And now we move from things people wore to things people played. Number 7. Video games and consoles. A box of old video games can contain almost anything. There may be common cartridges worth very little. There may be scratched discs nobody wants. And there may be one unusual title that makes the entire box worth investigating. The most important characteristics are often the exact game, edition, completeness, and condition. A loose cartridge is one thing. The same game with its original box, manual, and inserts is another. A sealed copy can be something entirely different. That distinction has created some extraordinary results. A sealed copy of Super Mario 64, for example, sold at auction for $1.56 million. The striking part is not simply the number, it is the reason behind it. Millions of copies of the game were produced, yet the specific example had survived in exceptional sealed condition. That is the paradox of modern collecting. Mass production does not guarantee that many perfect examples will survive. People opened their games, they played them, they lost the boxes, they threw away the manuals, they replaced the consoles. And after several decades, the survivors that remained complete can become surprisingly scarce. So when you find an old game collection, don't immediately sell it as one job lot. Separate the games, look at the exact titles, check the boxes, check the manuals. And if you discover an old console, remove batteries where appropriate so that leaking cells do not damage the machine. The games we played for fun can eventually become historical objects. And the next category takes that idea to another level. Number 6, trading cards. Trading cards are one of the clearest examples of why the word rare needs to be treated carefully. There are enormous numbers of cards in existence. Most are inexpensive. Many are almost worthless individually. But within large populations, a few combinations of edition, character, rarity, and condition can create extraordinary results. Pokémon cards are perhaps the most familiar example, but the same basic principle applies to sports cards and other collectible card categories. Early editions matter. Holographic cards can matter. Specific variations matter, and condition can become enormously important. A first edition Charizard in exceptional graded condition has sold for more than $400,000. That does not mean every Charizard is worth thousands. It means that one very specific combination of characteristics can transform a small piece of printed cardboard into a major collectible. This is why selling a mixed box of cards without sorting it first can be a mistake. Look for first edition markings. Look for unusual holographic cards. Look for early sets. Handle potentially important cards by their edges and protect them from moisture, scratches, and unnecessary handling. Trading cards also demonstrate one of the deepest principles in this entire subject. The object becomes valuable partly because people remember it. And memory is about to become even more important as we enter the top 5. Number 5, Lego sets. Lego may be one of the strangest collectibles on this list because its original purpose was the opposite of preservation. It was designed to be opened. It was designed to be built. It was designed to be taken apart and built again. Yet, retired Lego sets can become highly desirable once production ends. Research has even examined Lego as a collectible asset, with some retired sealed sets showing impressive historical returns. The most interesting examples tend to combine an attractive subject, limited availability, retirement from production, and excellent condition. And then there are the minifigures. A tiny plastic character that seems insignificant inside a large box can sometimes have its own collector market. This is where completeness becomes powerful. An unopened set preserves the exact object as it originally appeared. A complete used set with the instructions and packaging can also be interesting. But a box containing random bricks is a different category entirely. So, if there are old Lego sets in your house, especially unopened ones, resist the instinct to treat them as ordinary toys. Keep the packaging intact, protect it from sunlight and moisture, and if you have a large box of loose Lego, separate the unusual minifigures before assuming everything is worth the same amount. There is an amusing contradiction here. The toys that were most valuable as toys were meant to be played with. The examples that become most valuable as collectibles are often the ones nobody played with. And the next category follows that rule almost perfectly. Number 4, action figures still in their original packaging. An action figure outside its packaging is a toy. The same figure sealed inside its original card or box can become something very different. That difference is one of the most powerful ideas in toy collecting. Early Star Wars figures are among the best-known examples, but the principle extends far beyond one franchise. Figures from the 1980s and 1990s, particularly unusual variants, early releases, and examples that survived untouched in their original packaging, can attract serious collector interest. Why? Because packaging preserves context. It tells you how the manufacturer presented the character. It preserves the artwork. It preserves the original price sticker or distribution information in some cases. And, most importantly, it demonstrates that the figure survived without being played with. Some exceptionally rare early figures have reached tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. That does not make every old action figure valuable. A common loose figure may be worth very little. The details determine everything. So, search the attic, look behind cupboards, check old toy boxes. Pay particular attention to anything still sealed on its original card or inside its original window box. And be careful with the packaging. Bent cards, damaged plastic and repairs can significantly affect collector appeal. Sometimes the object that survived simply because a child forgot about it is the object that future collectors care about most. Which brings us to a much smaller category. Number 3, die-cast toy cars. Some of the most valuable collectibles can fit comfortably in the palm of your hand. Look through an old tin of Matchbox cars or Hot Wheels and you may see nothing but toys. Collectors may see manufacturing variations, early releases, unusual colors, and historically important models. Early Hot Wheels, particularly Red Line era cars from the late 1960s and 1970s, are a well-known collecting category. Certain examples can sell for hundreds or thousands of dollars, while extraordinary rarities can move far beyond that. One famous example is the pink rear-loading Beach Bomb prototype, which has been valued at well over $100,000. The reason these tiny cars become interesting is often hidden underneath. Turn them over, look at the wheels, check the base, look for early dates and markings. Pay attention to unusual colors. In die-cast collecting, a small manufacturing variation can completely change the identity of a model. That means the childhood tin sitting in an attic is worth sorting rather than automatically dismissing. And there is something wonderfully human about this category. A child kept a little car because they loved it. A parent put the toys into a box during a house move. Decades passed. The box survived. And suddenly, the thing preserved through simple sentiment has become something collectors actively search for. But the next category takes us from childhood toys into the birth of modern personal technology. Number 2, early consumer electronics. There is a drawer in many homes that people avoid opening. Old phones, cables, chargers, game devices, digital cameras, music players, batteries, things nobody uses anymore, but nobody has quite managed to throw away. That drawer deserves a second look. Early consumer electronics can become collectible when they represent an important moment in technological history. Early Game Boys, sealed Tamagotchis, early mobile phones, and first-generation Apple products are examples of categories collectors watch. The original iPod is particularly interesting because it represents a turning point in how people carried music. First-generation models with their original packaging and accessories can be desirable, and a factory-sealed first-generation iPod has famously sold at auction for $29,000. Again, the packaging matters. The cables matter. The manuals matter. The box matters. Together, they tell the complete story of the object. This is one of the reasons you should resist calling old electronics junk simply because they no longer function as modern devices. Technology moves so quickly that yesterday's ordinary product can become tomorrow's historical artifact. The first generation of a device represents a beginning, and beginnings are often what collectors want. There is one final object, however, that demonstrates this principle better than almost anything else. Number 1, the original iPhone. In 2007, the first iPhone was a consumer product. It was a phone. It was a music player. It was a camera. It was a piece of new technology that people bought, opened, and used. Millions were produced. Nothing about that sounds particularly rare. But now consider what happened to those millions of phones. Most were opened, most were used, many were damaged, many were recycled. Others disappeared into drawers and eventually ended up in electronic waste. A much smaller number survived